Go.
Are you ready? Yep. We all ready?
Not yet, sorry.
No, that's fine.
Get focus. Thank you. Thank you.
You right?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Kia ora and welcome on this stunning Auckland day. Thank you for coming out this morning on a Sunday. Today is a very important day for Aucklanders and for New Zealand and for Waka Kotahi as we continue to develop a very important project for New Zealand, which is the Waitemata Harbour crossing. So without going into any more detail, I'm now going to hand to the Prime Minister, who is going to make some comments about the project and where we're at the stage of the project delivery. So thank you, Prime Minister.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning everybody. It's fantastic to be here on a stunning Auckland day. About 4 months ago I stood in a spot actually on the other side of the harbour and said that we were about to consult with Aucklanders on the preferred option for a second harbour crossing. That was 2 months into my leadership, and it came after years of backwards and forwards and false starts and a lot of negativity around a second harbour crossing for Auckland. I said then that I'm ambitious for Auckland, and that continues to be the case today. I think we can make a lot of progress. So today with my colleague David Parker, I'm announcing the next steps in that work that we kicked off 4 months ago. We know that the population of Tamaki Makaurau in Auckland will grow significantly over the next few decades. There will be particularly high growth on the North Shore and in Albany. This will require intensification of urban areas on the North Shore and the transport infrastructure investment to support that growth. The approaches to the Auckland Harbour Bridge are increasingly being flooded due to storm surges and sea level rise, particularly on the northern side of the bridge, including during significant weather events that we saw earlier this year. The Waitemata, including the harbour and its edges, has high cultural, environmental and social significance, and people want real transport options. We know that the existing Auckland Harbour Bridge, whilst it's in good condition, it will require increasing closures for maintenance and because of things like high winds and traffic accidents. Aucklanders want us to do something about these things, and we have heard that message. When the Auckland Harbour Bridge was constructed in 1959, the population of Auckland was 430,000. Since then, there have been numerous studies on the need for an additional crossing of the harbour, whether it's road, mass transit. There is no question that additional connectivity across the harbour is required. During the most recent consultation, Aucklanders told us that they supported crossings for all types of transport, including public transport, a preference for tunnels rather than a bridge for greater transport resilience, and the importance of relieving congestion. The vision that we're setting out today includes separate road and rapid transit tunnels, reallocating lanes on the existing Auckland Harbour Bridge to walking and cycling, including 2 rapid transit routes to the North Shore, with both light rail and the northern busway on the North Shore to Albany. It's got the greatest benefits of all the options. It comes with a price tag of between $35 and $45 billion. That price tag of course would be paid for over many years in the same way as is usual for significant roading projects. Big transport projects like this, including the Waterview Tunnel, the Waikato Expressway and so on, are paid for over decades to distribute costs so that they don't fall unfairly on one generation. Many generations of Kiwis will benefit from these kind of big transport investments, and the second harbour crossing for Auckland is no different. We need to be realistic about the timeframes. This is a project that will take some time. It will span multiple governments, and the benefits will last for generations. More detailed work will take place between now and Christmas on how this can be delivered as part of a modern and affordable plan. Final approval of the plan is expected by Cabinet early next year. Minister Parker will talk through some of the greater details on this in a moment. Aucklanders have expressed their frustration about the worsening congestion in the city over many years. For decades we've heard about false starts, vested interest, political stalemates, a lack of vision and a lack of will. And it's time to stop that talk, which has ground progress to a halt, and we need to move into action mode. We need to continue the momentum. And that's what today is about. Our government is very ambitious for Auckland. Our government's vision is for a modern transport network for our biggest city and our gateway to the world. One that accommodates choice, that reduces congestion, that boosts productivity, and that keeps our emissions down. One that Aucklanders can not only see as a necessary commitment to make their lives easier and more enjoyable, but also one that they can be proud of. A second harbour crossing that properly enables all of the benefits is a linchpin of this vision. With genuinely world-class road, rail, cycling, walking, public and private transport options, that will put us alongside the likes of Melbourne, Brisbane and even Sydney as a modern, visitor-friendly city that's easy to get around and a great place to live. We need to keep the momentum going, and that's what today's announcement is all about. I'll now hand over to David Parker.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you for this, bringing the weather with you, actually. It's, for those of us who are here from Auckland, it has been a very, very grim year weather-wise. It feels like it's rained every day since Christmas, so it really is nice to be out in the sun. As the Prime Minister has said, a program of this scale can't be delivered in a single step. It must be phased, both to meet priority needs and to manage costs. The proposed road tunnels alongside the bridge are 5 kilometres long each. They're similar in concept to the Waterview tunnels, that's also 2 3-lane tunnels, and they're each 2.5 kilometres long. Many key elements of the city's interconnected transport vision are now already in place or in development. Through major projects like the Waterview Tunnel, the Northern Busway, more recently the City Rail Link and improvements to State Highways 1 and 16, major rail track upgrades, these are already either finished or close to completion. The beauty of the emerging option we have announced today is that this combines those separate upgrades into an integrated whole. Under any of the phasing options, the number of lanes available to cars, trucks, public transport, cycling and walking will increase. It will provide a much greater range of reliable transport choices for people moving around the wider city, whether they're in private vehicles, trucks or on public transport. New harbour tunnels will unlock the new and improved travel experience of long-suffering Auckland commuters. The road tunnels will be built first. They would enable a 6.3 kilometre extension to the Northern Busway. You can't really do that unless you have some alternative way around the harbour bridge. So you extend the Northern Busway right into the centre of the city. It would then connect with other public transport, including the City Rail Link, which of course has been an expensive project that we need to maximise the value out of. And it would connect to the much needed northwestern busway. The logical connection point for all of these services is south of the Harbour Bridge around Victoria Park. State Highways 1 and 16 also pass close to this area. In my opinion, and this is something the Prime Minister's already said, and I agree with him, one of the problems in Auckland transport planning has been too much uncertainty. All harbour crossing options land in the same area south of the bridge, near Victoria Park. This is the anchor point for everything. It's clear to me that the critical connections between the new tunnels, State Highways 1 and 16, the Harbour Bridge, the City Rail Link, the Northern Busway and the much needed Northwestern Busway and any future light rail option need to be secured now. Much of the land is already owned by the Crown. Securing the remaining land is important for all future options. The draft government policy statement on transport to be released in the coming weeks will prioritise and fund this work. Addressing resilience is also important. Seawater inundation of the approaches to the bridge due to storm surges and sea level rises are increasing, and that needs to be addressed too, and of course could using the spoil that comes out of the first tunnel. Thank you.
Right. Happy to open up for questions.
Prime Minister, as you said, this project would last many years and span the terms of many governments, presumably. How important is it to try and achieve some type of cross-party buy-in so that successive governments don't keep tinkering with it and keep delaying it?
Well, Waka Kotahi has now identified its emerging preferred option out of a range of options that we consulted Aucklanders on. I hope that's a platform by which all parties can now look at this and indicate whether they agree with it or not. All of the information that Waka Kotahi have put out around the options that they consulted on, I think provides a good basis for that agreement. And if they're not going to agree to that, then they need to be clear and transparent with New Zealanders about what their alternative could be.
One likely sticking point will be the payment. As you've said, it's going to cost billions of dollars. What's your view on the division of payment, whether it's public, private, a mix? Any thoughts on that?
As I've indicated, these types of projects get funded over a long period of time. There'll be a mix of options on the table. The next part of the process is to identify, obviously, the preferred route, the actual costs, the design, and how that could be paid for. All options are still on the table regarding that, so that does include things such as tolls, for example. We're leaving that on the table. The Auckland Harbour Bridge, right behind us, that of course was initially a toll road. So there is a history of that here, and there are other examples of that in New Zealand's more recent history where tolls have been part of the equation. So we're leaving all of those options on the table.
Okay, and just so before other people come in, you mentioned 2029 is the start of the first stage of the road tunnels, and you've got a cabinet meeting early in the new year to sign off. When would Aucklanders expect to see the first piece of construction underway?
I think, as everyone will envisage, this is going to be a very large piece of engineering, building the new tunnels that we're talking about. So there's going to be a lot of preparation involved. And between the decision, for example, to go ahead with Waterview, the decision to go ahead with Transmission Gully, there was still quite a long period of time before people necessarily saw the visible signs of that progress, because there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure that everything falls into place in the way that you would expect it to. So we have to be realistic. This is going to be a program of work that's going to take many years, and it will be into the next decade before Aucklanders see the benefits of that. One of the, things that we're focused on as a government is making sure that we continue to remove all of the roadblocks, we continue to put markers in the ground so that progress and momentum continues.
Why have you decided to go with the road tunnels first rather than rail? Given your theory you're supposed to be shifting from road to rail, something like that.
Well, if you look at what the road tunnels unlock for us, it does actually unlock greater public transport connectivity as well. So in order to improve the bus links, for example, across the harbour, you actually need more capacity to do that. So the road tunnels aren't just about road, cars and trucks. It does unlock those other options, including active transport options like walking and cycling.
So could I add to that? The Northern Busway, which coincidentally I was back then Minister of Transport, and was fortunate to be part of the Auckland. It's another Labour project. The Northern Busway is the most successful public transport project ever in recent decades. Its problem is that it can't get over the Harbour Bridge in dedicated lanes, and it doesn't connect up to the CRL properly, and neither does it connect up to the connections that we need out the northwest. So, really, for me, the public transport priority immediately is making that work better, get the Northwestern Busway going properly, and that will get people out of cars, give them more choices. We're not forcing them out of cars, but that will reduce traffic congestion. In order to do that, you actually need to do the tunnels next to the bridge first.
And how are you going to fund 30 billion or so without using public-private partnerships and without borrowing?
As I've indicated, all options for how we fund this are still on the table. That's the next part of the process. I'd imagine that in the next business case stage, that'll include canvassing all of the funding options.
Does that include public-private partnerships?
Like I've said, every option's still on the table at this point for this project. It's going to be a big multi-generational project, and we need to canvass all of the ways we could pay for that.
Would that include Chinese investment and construction?
I'm not proposing to change our existing overseas investment processes for this project.
How can you get a light rail to Albany if you're really struggling for years and years and years to get one to the airport?
I think it's important that Aucklanders see that the vision that we have for transport in Auckland is a connected one. So the conversations that we're having around light rail and along Dominion Road, for example, have to connect up with connectivity to the North Shore, and they have to connect up with other things that we're doing, including the City Rail loop. So I think it's really important that Aucklanders can see that all of the parts fit together. In terms of the timing and the sequencing, there are a lot of moving parts, and things will continue to move around in that regard. But it's important, you have to have a master plan in order to actually deliver things that are logical and sensible.
But times are tough. Are you trying to have your cake and eat it? You're going with road and light rail. Isn't it really a choice at the moment?
The plan sets out a master vision for what transport in Auckland should look like several decades from now. Of course that's going to be sequenced, it's going to be done in stages, it's going to be funded in different ways. Different parts of that will be funded using different methods. And I think Aucklanders would expect that.
So when do you envisage the light rail to be built?
Well, the next stage will set out more detailed timeframes for that.
So is it 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30?
Like I said, the next stage will set out some more detailed timeframes for that.
How big of a funding challenge do you think this will be, given that New Zealanders are already facing what, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in COVID repairs and over our funds?
I think if you look at it, yes, it seems like a big number when you take all of the bits all at once, but we're not doing all of the bits all at once. We're not funding it all up front. It will be funded over a number of decades, over a number of generations, as big transport projects are. The Auckland Harbour Bridge wasn't funded all up front. In fact, the cost of that was spread over quite some time, and the tolls that were used to pay for that existed for quite a long time. David can probably give you a bit more detail about where this sits within the context of road transport funding. But you know, road transport projects now, and actually public transport projects, they all have quite big, daunting price tags associated with them. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing them.
Yeah, just on that, you know, in some ways the tunnels parallel to the harbour bridge are comparable with Waterview tunnels, twice as long, a little bit more complicated because you're underwater and there are some ventilation issues and safety issues. But the Waterview tunnels came in at less than $2 billion, so you can see that the initial estimate that's put around the two tunnels and related works on the harbour bridge at $13 billion is pretty generous funding. We won't have accurate costings on those things until the next phase of work that's being done by Waka Kotahi, but it's true to say that Waterview Tunnel, I think, is seen by Aucklanders of having been an enormously successful project, and people can understand how a similar project next to the Harbour Bridge would give benefits to Auckland.
What sort of population growth does this cater for over the next 30, 50 years?
The population projections, I haven't got them off the top of my head, but they're in the Waka Kotahi study as to where the different population growth is. The Albany region is projected to be one of the centres of population growth that grows most strongly. Already these corridors are very choked. You know, you'll probably find as you drive away from here this morning you'll have trouble getting out of Lake Road. If you come from the North Shore during peak hours, the bridge is getting choked, and the projection from Waka Kotahi, unless we do something different. Brett, how many years is it before the Harbour Bridge chokes up?
Well, look, I think it's in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. It depends on how much more we get out of the busway.
So what population growth?
So 10 to 15 years time, unless we do something like this, the bridge sort of starts to grind to a halt, which Auckland obviously can't do. Given that it takes 10 to 15 years to build something like this, you've got to start now.
So the population's grown 1.5% to 2% per year across the country for the last 20 years. Do you expect, or do you think it's appropriate that it should grow at the same rate for the next 20, 50 years, which is what this project will cover?
Well, I think the transport planners are right to plan based on historical trends. It's a brave person to suggest that the future will be that much different.
And just another comment, please, on the amount of time this will take, not just for the two road tunnels, but also for the light rail. You mentioned decades. How many decades do you think we might be looking at here, please, for honest?
As I've indicated, we'll have more information on the, when we go through the next stage. We're aiming to accelerate that, so we want to have the more detailed business cases coming to Cabinet early next year. That will set out a bit more detail around the sorts of timeframes that we're talking about. But if we think about other roading projects, so Waterview Tunnel, a lot of the work for that, a lot of the planning work for that was done under the Clark Labour government, and then it was a national government that built it, and finally, it was only completed right at the end of their tenure. Transmission Gully, actually, I think the planning for that started in the 1990s, and in fact we only recently opened it less than 2 years ago. These projects span generations.
And this is bigger than any of those?
Oh, it's a very big project, it's a very big vision, but as we've said, it can be done in stages. So the fact, are we going to have the whole thing completed in 10 years? No, we're not. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to be well on the way to having parts of that underway.
Some people alive today who won't live to see it being completed.
The reality here is that this is a big vision for Auckland transport. We must have that, and we must have a commitment to delivering on that vision.
Are you seeing this as a vote winner then in this election coming up in 2 months' time, or is this just pie in the sky?
Well, this is ultimately government work that we're doing here today as opposed to Labour Party work. You'll see the Labour Party transport policies in due course. But ultimately, the role of good governments is to make sure that you're making sound decisions that can withstand changes of government. The work that we've set out here, the transport vision for Auckland, is a very sensible, robust one. Yes, it is going to, I think, provide reassurance to Aucklanders that the current government takes their concerns around congestion and around the need for greater transport options very seriously.
Would you expect this tunnel to be built before the rail tunnels for the rail line to the airport?
Well, in respect of the rail to the airport, those decisions haven't been taken and won't be taken before the election. The government and the council have both asked the group that's looking at the light rail options to do further cost-benefit analysis as to the benefits of over the ground compared with the tunnelled options, and that work won't be completed before the election. In respect of the phasing, I would have thought that the phasing, although there's lots of different phasing options, it seems likely that the tunnels next to the bridge would be built before the tunnel to the North Shore with the rail in it.
But what about tunnels, if there were to be tunnels to the airport? Would you expect the tunnel across the harbour for the roads to be built before that?
No, I wouldn't, but that's not to say that it will be a tunnelled option that is chosen down Dominion Road.
Is your preference?
You'll see also that we're giving pretty clear indications that in the government policy statement that comes out in draft form on the next 3 years spend on public transport, that the focus will actually be on the need to improve the northwestern busway as the immediate priority.
So is your preference for above ground rather than below ground?
Look, I'm not going to express a preference until I see the result of the work that's coming out of the group that's looking at it.
What are the climate implications in terms of emissions of these projects? When, for example, including the embedded carbon, does this become a carbon reducer?
Well, the embedded emissions in current technology is unavoidable. You do actually have to use fossil fuel vehicles to bore tunnels. That's true of any tunnel. It's also true of any new bridge if you pursued a bridge alternative. Although it would be theoretically nice to be able to say we're not going to do anything, Auckland would grind to a standstill in about a decade if we didn't do something. In respect of any of the phased options, there are better and improved public transport outcomes which are low carbon enabled.
So when does it actually start reducing emissions? Because with the embedded emissions, the airport to the CBD doesn't actually do it for 15, 20 years. When does it reduce emissions, this project?
Well, there'll be more detail on that when the business case is finalised, but I think it's a truism to say that unless you do something, you'll have people locked up in gridlock on the roads, and that has emissions too.
Could you just remind us, please, about the consultation? Maybe this is a question for Waka Kotahi. How many Aucklanders actually were consulted with, and how confident are you that this option fairly represents what most Aucklanders want to see happen?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the consultation...
Just
yeah,
one
sure.
second. And could you say your name, please? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm Brett Glidden from Waka Kotahi. So the consultation was far and wide. It went across all of Auckland. I haven't got the exact numbers of the people that inputted submissions, but it was a large number, and there was great support for improved transport connections across the harbour. That was one thing they definitely wanted. They wanted improved public transport, and the Minister has talked about stage one being improving and getting more from the Northern Busway, and then ultimately mass rapid transit. They also want improved vehicle connections across the harbour, and especially in relation to freight movement. So we think that this option definitely responds to the feedback that we had from Aucklanders around what they want.
We're talking thousands of people?
I haven't got the number on the top of my head actually, but we can confirm that afterwards. Thank you.
Could I ask the Prime Minister, what is your preference that nzherald.co.nz focus on? Is it emissions reduction or is it improving roads?
You have to do both, and I don't see it as an either or. Okay?
Prime Minister, can we switch topics?
Yes.
The Green Party today has announced free dental care as one of its policies heading into the election. Will Labour support that policy?
The Labour Party will unveil its health manifesto, our health policy for the election in due course.
Do you agree that is a necessary step, though, in improving the health outcomes for New Zealanders?
I think we should continue to strive to improve the health outcomes for New Zealanders. I think the conversation around dental needs to be part of that conversation, but I'm not announcing Labour's policy
Does it
today.
need to be a dominant part of the conversation, though?
As I've indicated, I'm not announcing Labour's health policy
The Green
today.
Party says that it wants to pay for this by using the income generated from a wealth tax. Will you walk back your ruling out of a wealth tax? Why not?
Look, I've already set that out. It's not something that we're going to be doing in the next term.
What do you say to Kiwis who are disappointed with that answer from you today?
I say that they'll see when we set out our tax policy that we're taking a balanced approach to the forthcoming election, that we'll be setting out a credible and realistic plan for what we're committing to and how we're going to pay for it.
Will you pay for free dental care?
I'm not announcing our health policy today.
Is that a promise though? Because a lot of Kiwis will look at the Green Party policy today on free dental care and think that is something I can get on board with, and the only thing stopping the Green Party is Labour.
I'll let the Green Party speak to their own policy announcement. That's fair enough. It's an election campaign. All parties are going to have their own policy announcements. I'll set our policy out in due course.
Do you expect that to occur here though with voters?
I think that voters aren't going to form judgments on our policy until we've actually told them what it is.
They might form judgments though on your inability to entertain a Green Party policy which they feel may benefit them hugely, may benefit every single person in this country.
Well, I haven't done that.
What'd you say?
Just
Just
on the funding, can you do this without value capture uplift, because these projects would increase the value of the land around those projects?
Value uplift is shared value uplift is not ruled out. It's unlikely to be achieved as easily on the tunnels as it would be on the link through up past Takapuna to Albany. But in respect of that, it's interesting. I think there's an emerging political consensus around those issues. And as the Prime Minister has said, these projects take many decades across multiple governments, but we certainly haven't ruled out any of those options, as other parties have.
And what about a contribution from the Auckland Council, which would benefit from these projects? And can you do value capture without the council? Can you do it on your own?
Well, those are all issues for the future.
Okay,
Going back
thanks
to the
everyone.
plan, just one more
Last
question. Last one. A recent report by Auckland Transport says that tunnels are very expensive to operate. So have you taken that in consideration, and how much will be the operating cost?
What do you want? Cut away.
Step into that one.
Yeah, that's correct. Tunnels can be more expensive to operate, but that has been taken in account of the analysis. We also have obviously challenges with the harbour bridge where we're having to close that regularly now because of wind and other issues, so we remove those risks. The tunnels also allow us to protect the foreshore of the harbour, allows us to raise the state highway along the foreshore between Akaranga and the base of the bridge without stepping further out into the harbour, and protect that sensitive environment and area. So there's a lot of benefits associated with the tunnel that offset the slightly increased operating cost.
What's your preference, to reduce emissions or to improve congestion times?
I support what the Prime Minister said. We've got to do both.
But have you taken into consideration the operating cost? How much will be the operating cost?
I haven't got the number in front of me, but absolutely we take into consideration the cost of operating the network against the value and the benefits of the investment we make.
All right, thanks everybody.
Just one last question for
All right,
one
you
of
can
the
have the
three
very
women
lucky last name.
On migrant exploitation, I'm sure you're aware over the past few months there have been lots of reports of migrants who have paid tens of thousands of dollars through offshore agents, and sometimes RNZ is aware of to local New Zealand agents to come here and then been dismissed by their accredited employers within weeks or days, even sometimes. We know that Immigration New Zealand is investigating about 160 accredited employers who are potentially problematic and in relation to the abuse of this visa category. Are you concerned about what's happening now? I mean, it's some 160 accredited employers, that's a large number.
Any suggestion of migrant exploitation is something that the government is concerned about. One of the reasons that we introduced the accredited employer work scheme was so that we had more tools to do something about it.
Do you though think you loosened settings too quickly last year and weren't ready or prepared to keep it clean?
No, I don't. I think that we set up the accredited employer work visa because we knew that in New Zealand in the past there have been instances of migrant worker exploitation, and we wanted to have new tools and new ways of being able to crack down on employers who engage in that kind of behaviour. The accredited employer work visa gives us an ability to do that.
But the migrant advisors say it's actually made it worse.
Look, we continue to keep looking at it. We'll continue to look at the advice that they're providing us and the evidence base that might underpin that. But the reality is, it's early days for the accredited employer work visa. It does give us the ability to stop any employers who are involved in migrant exploitation being able to bring workers into the country in the future.
160 accredited employers being investigated by Immigration New Zealand at the moment. Does that show that there is a problem in how we're accrediting employers? Are we too loose with that?
It shows that we were right in introducing a system that requires employers to be accredited so that we can remove the accreditation if there are instances of migrant worker exploitation. The fact that employers are being investigated and that they run the risk of losing their accreditation actually shows that the system's operating as we designed it.
But what about the fact that hundreds of migrants are already here? They've been exploited, they've lost their lifetime savings and money they've loaned from loan sharks in some cases, and some are living in cars we're aware of. What are we going to do about these migrants who have already suffered? Will we give them open work visas?
So we consider those on a case-by-case basis, and that's I don't ever want to make blanket judgments on those because we have a process of working through that where migrant worker exploitation is demonstrated. We've got a process of working through the consequences.
Will the government consider emergency benefits for these workers as we did through COVID?
As I've indicated, it will depend on the circumstances of each individual case. Okay, thanks everyone. Yeah. Please come towards the